Dear viewer, good evening and welcome to Spotlight. With us tonight, Mr. Roy Gessford. And Roy, tell me more about you. You know, it's usually we do interview either about politician or about business or about social issue, but this is a unique. You have a study about a language that was 400 years ago, and this is part of your master. Tell me about what you do and who you represent.
Well, again, Mr. Jadan, my name is Roy Gessford, and I represent, at some level, my own company. We're Let in the Light Publishing.
Okay.
And as a publisher, our goal is to bring to humanity the wisdom. We feel there's a little bit of a disconnect between the youth and the aged people of today, and to share the wisdom from the previous generation with the current generation is our goal.
I see. And when you concentrate, I believe you told me Aramaic language.
Yes.
So tell me why that comes to you. Yes.
Well, as a scholar, I was always interested in the languages of the scriptures. And so that would include anything related to the holy three. Monotheistic is where I've put most of my emphasis. So originally I studied Judaism, Hebrew, and then a little bit of Greek because I felt that was pertinent. Aramaic, I have had 3 Arabic classes. It's my weakest of the Semitic languages. Latin, Spanish, and French. And then, of course, English is my main language. And so,
how many languages you speak?
Well, one I specialize in, but I've taken classes in 7.
That's great.
So, yeah, well, I feel language is if we can think in those languages, we can understand those cultures better.
Yes.
And so the goal for me is to understand the thoughts of the prophets, to understand the thoughts of the leaders of the cultures that have come before us, so then we can learn from them and not repeat the mistakes that could occur again.
Exactly. So you're reserving a language, and probably throughout the history, many language died, and there is a few language unique, and it need to be preserved. And your situation, you're getting the Aramaic language. A lot of people, when I'm Chaldean myself.
Oh, great.
A lot of people, they think probably Lebanese or Egyptian,
Sure.
Because we cater to the whole Middle Eastern community and to the whole nation.
Okay.
We are in every state. The Aramaic, they don't know what's the Aramaic, and they are part of the Middle East, which is the Aramaic is the 3 language: Hebrew, Arabic, and Aramaic. So tell me more.
Well,
highlight that for me, please.
Sure. Because my original language study went through Hebrew and then through Arabic, I wasn't sure which one came first. But the truth is probably Sumerian came first, and then Akkadian.
Yes.
And then
we're going through history now.
Yes, we're going 5,000 years back. Yeah. But probably at least by Hammurabi's written code would have been about 1750 BC. BCE, and then Abraham probably around the same time period. And he would have brought the Aramaic to the Holy Land, what we consider the Holy Land now, and then out of that would have come Hebrew, and out of that Arabic and Ethiopic. So your 5 Semitic languages would have been Akkadian, Aramaic, Hebrew, Arabic, and Ethiopic.
So we call them a Sumerian. They speak different language than Akkadian?
Yes, I think the Sumerian, would be, the best example I could use would be English. And so the English of Shakespeare in just a couple hundred years has changed into modern English.
Yeah.
Yes, and so the dialects change and eventually the language changes together. But in 5,000 years, there are massive amounts of change. And so our goal is to look at which is the oldest spoken of the languages. And the oldest spoken language by mankind today is Aramaic. Now, there's a friendly competition between Aramaic and Tamil out of India, which is older. And Sanskrit might be a little older, but nobody speaks Sanskrit these days.
Yes.
A few instructors of yoga and things like that will retain that. But as a culture, as somebody who actually speaks fluent Aramaic, the Chaldeans are incredibly unique. There are other groups that speak Aramaic as well, but this number is largely older I would say, let's say, for instance, the high estimate, there's 400,000 Aramaic speakers left. 65% of those are over 65. Those are my own statistics. But as a language, we need to come up with a way to preserve it, because if it's not preserved, there are over 7,000 languages. The estimate is that 90% of them will be gone by the end of this century.
And the reason of that, there is many language, they don't have a country to develop.
That's right.
They don't have education to hear. So either they go to the church or the synagogue or the mosque, or probably the different language. They have different religion that they want, but that religion and that language disappear because no countries.
That's a great point, Mr. Jadan. Yeah. And so with the loss, in some respect, of the Aramaic-speaking homeland in the last probably 20 years, maybe even the last 4 years, with the majority of those native speakers, now they're speaking that language still, but their children are assimilating to new cultures, assimilating to all the amenities that Western civilization has, as well as some went further east. But this is why we're in the danger zone right now of losing what I would consider the most significant spoken language, arguably, today, because it's the building block language for the other Semitic languages. So if you learn Aramaic, the example I would use would be the word shlama,
Yes.
the word for peace. Everyone loves peace, wants peace. And so how to obtain that through language? Well, the next spoken word out of Hebrew would be shalom.
Yes.
And then in Arabic, salam. And you can see how similar those three languages are. But if you start with Arabic or Ethiopic, the later language, you lose the root and the origin of how the word shlama or shalom came into practice. And so studying the origin of the root of the word helps the understanding of the modern languages. So the Arabic speakers, the Hebrew speakers, they would benefit by the studying of the Aramaic. As a matter of fact, the Hebrew speakers, some of their sacred texts are written, like the Talmud from Babylon, is written in Chaldean Aramaic. And some of our deepest scholars of the Chaldean language, Chaldean Aramaic, are Jewish. Yeah, they love to learn this language because it enriches and enhances their own study. And that would be true for all the Semitic languages.
Roy, we know the Chaldean Empire, they were extended to many, many places. In one time, how many people speak the Aramaic throughout the history?
Well, all I can say is it would be the known world. That's how scholars, and there are many people, the stories passed down in different ways, but certainly around 586 BCE, then BC, then you have what is known as the known world, the civilized world, where the people were. And so that would be, today, there's really not a comparison because civilization has taken place globally, but to just kind of say what was considered...
Few million, they used to... throughout.
At least. That's a low estimate, because the language permeated from probably the Indus River to Egypt, and from south to north. And so the millions is, my dad is he gives a docent at the Getty Museum. And so the later empires would have been the Greek and the Roman empires. And at least 10 million would have been in those. And so the numbers, I don't think, changed that dramatically. But the exhibits at the Getty Museum in Los Angeles point to the fact that it was in the millions for sure.
We're going to come to your book, but I have three questions.
Oh, great.
What I understand, there is over 1 million Chaldean speaking the Aramaic in India.
Today?
And
that number might, there were 10,000 churches set up by the Chaldean speaking community in China and India by the year 1000. And I have seen in Malabar one reference to the Chaldean language. And there may have been, and certainly there were many more than 1 million speakers, but today that number seems a little high. And if they were speaking Aramaic, I don't think it would be the Chaldean dialect, because there are between 100 and 150 different dialects spoken. Then over the years, my feeling is the dialect, just as the the dialect from village to village in Iraq was different,
dialogue.
then the dialect in India would be different. And so the total amount of Aramaic speakers may be in the millions. That seems a little high to me. But for the Chaldean Aramaic dialect itself, that number is dwindling. Once there are less than 100,000, it's considered a dead language. So right now, a couple 100,000, maybe 400,000 or 500,000 Chaldean Aramaic speakers at the most. Under 100,000, scholars say this is the danger zone.
I see. Aramaic, it doesn't go to one religion.
No.
It could be different religion. Tell me more about it. Different religion speaking the Aramaic. Different culture speaking the Aramaic, as we mentioned in India.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, even in the probably most well-known translation into English, so this would consider the entire Christian community, the translators did not want to translate the King James Version's Aramaic into another language. So you have phrases in both the Hebrew scriptures in the book of Daniel and in the New Testament, in many of the Gospels, of the actual Aramaic being left intact.
Yes.
So the pronunciation, the translation of those come through the translators of England, but the word sabachthane is a wah sound. So many of the readers that read that in the classical English, it should be sawachthane. And so this understanding of the original would help because it shows up in the text differently than it does as the spoken. And so the understanding of the Chaldean Aramaic affects certainly the Christian scriptures, as we talked about the Hebrew scriptures with the Babylonian Talmud being the original language, and then the foundation language for Arabic being Aramaic. It will only help the understanding of the Arabic language, the translation of the holy book there would be tremendously enhanced through an understanding of Aramaic. So yes, without a doubt.
Okay, I'm Chaldean again, but I don't know this. My late dad, he was deacon, and sometimes he would serve in the church.
Wonderful.
And the language they speak is different than we the Chaldeans speak with each other. Tell me about this.
Yes, we talk about it in the book. There are at least 5 or 6 different eras of the language. It transitions. So we talked about the King James and the Shakespeare English. You have Old Aramaic, maybe around the time of 800 when it first became a language. And then that lasted a couple hundred years. And now you have what's called Late Aramaic that the church would use. The Chaldean Catholic Church, for example, is one of the key components to preserving the Aramaic language. But the language that's spoken in the church, and I went to a church service on Sunday, and part of it was in the ancient language, part of it was in the modern spoken language. And so you're right, yes, there is a slight difference between the two. I have taken courses in both. So I can speak a little of the modern, but I can study the classical. And the difference between the two, you can account that to time. Time changes the language, the usage language. And although it's a wonderful study, it can get confusing in terminology and word source. But the origin of the modern language is the older language. And so it builds out of the old comes from the new comes out of the old.
Yes. You publish many books. And you publish one about the Chaldean Aramaic. And can you lift it so
Sure.
see?
Yes.
Okay. Tell me what's in this book.
Well, in order to preserve a language, you must take a stand for what the language represents. And because scholarship in the academic world, they would say languages are assimilated. As a matter of fact, in the history of mankind, only one language has gone to what scholars called a dead language, under 100,000, and then come back. Any idea what that language might be?
Aramaic?
Hebrew. Because there are still a couple 100,000 speakers of the Aramaic language, then it has not become a dead language yet, but it's close. Hebrew actually did become a dead language, but through the synagogue, through the rabbis, through the practice of the religion, then it was preserved. And so Hebrew is the only language, and my thought as a scholar was there's no reason that another language that represents spiritual and religious connotations couldn't follow the same path of the only language. The goal, of course, would be to prevent it from becoming a dead language, to have the Chaldean dialect or all Aramaic not become a dead language would be the goal. And so how do you do that? Well, in scholarship, they would say, no, they all become a dead language. We studied some of the Native American languages, and they have gone below 100,000 speakers. The Hebrew has bounced back, and now it's flourishing. It's a wonderful language. But through teaching, not through preaching, not through, it was difficult to measure, how in order to keep the language alive, not through the internet necessarily, although communication, teaching, as through, student to teacher, that relationship has been around for millennium, through the Greeks with Socrates, Plato, they all took students. Those teachers, my teacher, Father Buzzy, out of San Diego, he teaches at a community college there. He has for 31 years. He has students all over the world.
Does he teach the Aramaic language?
He teaches both the modern and the classical Aramaic. Yeah, and our company publishes the book for his classes. So the actual language that we're teaching to preserve, my model for writing this scholarship, and I got the degree from Claremont Lincoln University, a good university. And so we were able to access the scholarship, and there's not much written on preserving the Aramaic language. The surveys used in this book will help the future scholars. So the children of today, well, how do we preserve the language? They can use the surveys, you can use the research in this book to not only become great citizens, but also activists, language activists, for what I would consider the most significant language in the world, to preserve it before it becomes a dead language. Who's going to do it? Well, I'll be around for a while, and I'm happy to do my part, but with every generation, we must teach the next generation. So currently, Let in the Light Publishing, the company, we offer tutoring to people all over the world. We have students in 3 different continents.
Do you have classes in YouTube that somebody could go and...
Yes, the YouTube we don't use quite as much. Father Michael teaches on Facebook. We use I think it's called the Zoom, those kinds of things. But some people aren't comfortable using the technology, so we do it on a phone call. So people call in, and because of conference calls, I'm sure many people have done those recently, then you can teach, if they have the book in front of them, then we can teach on the phone as well.
Good idea.
Yeah, and sometimes we have groups because the cost of the lesson was meant for a middle-class family in America to be able to provide lessons for their children. I'm a former tennis pro. When I was teaching down in Nevis, I would charge $150 an hour for 1 hour of tennis. So I thought, family, $80 an hour is about half what I would charge for a tennis lesson, is fair to preserve the language. But we allow group lessons. So if somebody would like to split the cost, then the most important thing is they offer the language for their families to learn it. And of course, we offer scholarships for those that don't have enough funds.
How they do that? Tell me. If somebody, and we know a lot of people, they like to love to learn a different language.
Yes.
Aramaic, it's, the Spanish, the French, the English is going to be here and for another 100 of years.
Yes.
But the Aramaic could not be here within, after 20, 30, 40 years. By learning it, you keep it going.
Yes.
Is there a phone number? Is there a website they have to go to?
Well, thank you for asking, Mr. Jadan. There are 2 ways. The best way is the website because you can sign up for the lessons in one swipe of the key. It's the simplest way. Okay. And the youngest generation loves the computer.
Absolutely.
So letinthelightpublishing.com, www.letinthelightpublishing.com. Under services, we have different packages of lessons. But for everyone out there, I will give you my phone number. You may call me. I will take your call personally. We can set up an individual package. Whatever your family or whatever your needs may be, we can accommodate. We've taught people in prison, in jail. We've taught special learners. We've taught people with education, not even to the 10th grade. We've taught males, females, disabilities, mental disabilities, anything. There are no limitations to learn the language. The only limitation is your own thought. And that phone number is 619-586-3523. I don't like text messages, especially as initiation. But if you need to text, You can text because sometimes overseas it's easier. I will respond. But I love phone calls, 619-586-3523. As a linguist, if I can hear the person's voice, I can tell the enthusiasm, the dedication, those kinds of things right off the bat. And the students have the best time. So
we're going to put the website and your phone number and a screen so could people take it and call you and, be in touch with you.
That would be wonderful.
Yes.
Yeah.
More about the book. Because honestly, this is something that a lot of people, they like to read about it, and to know about it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it's important to realize.
You did interview, for example, with a scholar or historian from the Chaldean or the Hebrew or the Arabic, to collect all those information.
Yes. Well, thank you, Mr. Jadan. We have what's called in the academic world, when you do a master's thesis, and this represents the work on my master's thesis, the stakeholders, S-T-A-K-E. We love to eat, but they are the stakeholders. And the stakeholders in this particular group were very unique. So I wanted an international group. I wanted a religiously diverse group.
Yes.
I wanted a pluralism of thinkers on it. So although it's my work and it represents what came to me to do, kind of like if you have an advisory board or a board of directors, those are your stakeholders.
Uh-huh.
And so there is a man at Cambridge University, a scholar, who is setting up an audio library of all the different Aramaic dialects. And he has recordings of some speakers and their village. They were the last speaker, and now there are no more speakers from that village.
Wow.
Yeah, so very unique man. His name is Dr. Jeffrey Kahn out of Cambridge.
That is.
Well, let's see. One of the speakers that he had was living in Uzbekistan. And I'm not sure which village in Iraq she was from, but she was the last villager from that village, and she was living, in that area. And he recorded her, and then when she has passed on, yes. But there is a village there, Zakho. Zakho is the Sabar family. Ariel Sabar wrote a wonderful book, My Father's Paradise, and his father was a stakeholder on my project. So he's called, he was Yona Sabar, and he was instrumental in making the UCLA Near Eastern Studies Department. So you had Dr. Khan, Dr. Sabar, Dr. Shin Khan was at Yale. He's Professor Emeritus, and he's from South Korea. Lovely man and his wife, and he was a Sumerian professor. So that goes way back. Father Buzzy from San Diego and a Chaldean himself.
Absolutely.
And then Dr. Rocco Errico, who is kind of Italian and has made his own spiritual journey. And Dr. Errico is very significant because when I first finished my graduate work at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley, and I finished the language department with Hebrew and Greek in the seminary, I got a YouTube video of Dr. Errico. And he was speaking Aramaic, and I didn't know if the Aramaic language even existed. So I saw the YouTube video. This was around 2010. It was. This was my interest, my origin, how I learned about it, because I didn't realize it was still a spoken language.
Mm-hmm.
And so I called Dr. Errico. He was in Georgia. And I said, "Excuse me, sir, thank you for producing the video in the first place. This is very well done. And how can I learn the language?" And he said, "Well, there's only one place you can learn the language in the United States right now. You must move to San Diego." Well, I went to college in San Diego, and I love San Diego. I'm
University?
UC San Diego. Yeah, the Tritons. I'm an avid surfer. I was on the bluffs of Black Beach. I was surfing all the time as a youth, and I thought I would love to move back down there. So I called the professor, kind of a cute. Do we have time for one story with my professor?
Short.
Okay, I'll make it short. So I moved to San Diego, but before I moved there, I had a meeting with Father Bazzi. And the meeting was to see if I could enter his class. And I had just finished Hebrew. I thought I would try Aramaic. And I had a new car with a new GPS system. And in order to find his location, I had to drive from one side of San Diego to the other. And my GPS took me all over the place. I had a 1 o'clock meeting. I showed up at 12:57.
Yes.
And Father Bazzi is a very strong believer in Aramaic, in Chaldean culture. Yep. And I walk through his door at 12:57. I sit down like you, and he says, "What do you want?" I don't put anything. Oh, he was, very firm. He had a meeting at 1. He had a meeting at 12:45. He had 6 different things going on. And here's some American student saying, "I'd like to learn your language." So I think about it for a second. What do I want? Understanding.
Yes.
My son, you have come to the right place. Oh, wow. That started a good relationship.
So tell me, if somebody want to buy the book, how they do it?
You go to the website and order it.
Oh, the website, which is the same website we're going to put on the screen?
Yes. Yeah, letinthelightpublishing.com. We're not taking credit cards at this moment, so PayPal, or you can call me with a check or a cash. If you're interested in the book, we will see that you get the book. We have, I think, 12 different books now, both paperback and hardback. The language tutoring is available, and Father Michael has modern and classical language Aramaic books, as well as history on Chaldeans, history of Tilkepe. He has a new book out, The Life of the Tilkepnaya, a sequel to his master's thesis. And so we'll have 2 books on that particular village. And the hope from me as the publisher is that every village will publish their own history.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah, they whether they're doing well or not all over the world.
But, it's understandable with each other,
Yeah, well, each community has so much to offer the world.
Yes.
And so in my study, I've looked at the villages nearby, Al-Kosh, Batnaya, and realized each one of these Iraqi villages need to offer. But I've also traveled to 5 continents. And there's not one city I've been to on this planet that shouldn't write their own history and their contribution to humanity.
Roy, do you publish books about history too, or just language?
History and language. We have certain authors that would like to publish with us that are currently writing history books.
Yes.
We are not in the mainstream of publishing. And so our authors are those that are most passionate about their subjects. And because we're a new, relatively young publishing company compared to some of the larger ones, we attract authors that have a story to tell. And with history, you can't help but tell it through your own viewpoint. And so we attract readers and writers from many different faiths. I was a tennis pro at resorts, 5- and 4-star resorts all over the world.
Wow.
I was also teaching in jails with,
I feel like this much better.
Well, to meet people who have a story to tell is part of humanity. And so the language to me, the Chaldean, of all the things that I could be writing about, this is the most important to me at this moment. And so the journey that I have taken, I could have written about anything. I love all of humanity, but I thought the story that needs to be told now comes through this particular culture at this moment, because if we lose this, everyone will be impacted.
Roy, thank you so much for coming here. As somebody who speaks the Aramaic, on behalf of the whole community, we thank you so much. Because through people like you, we keep the language alive. And we pass it from one generation to another. And you do a great job. And we thank you so much for that.
Well, Shalom Lachon, and thank you so much, Mr. Jadan, for having me on your program. And I appreciate the time that you spent with me.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
That was my interview with Roy Gessford.
Yes, sir.
Gessford. He wrote so many books, but for his master, he concentrated in Aramaic language. And a lot of people, they hear about the Aramaic language and they don't know what it is. The Aramaic is the language that spoke throughout the history, and especially in the Middle East. We have three language and very close to each other: the Aramaic, the Hebrew, and the Arabic. And honestly, by learning another language, it's a huge plus for you, that you could read many different books, you could watch many different language, and please, and if, especially the Aramaic people, the people who their father and grandfather spoke it, we need you to preserve it and teach it to your children. As we said, we need it to go from one generation to another. And you know what? It's something noble. Thanks for watching, and good night.